Hey guys, welcome back to more Malicious Compliance Reddit stories. In today's Ripestories video, my CEO thought that he was clever, fired me 24 hours before my annual bonus, and pocketed the savings, but there was one tiny detail in my contract that he overlooked. That detail was his fatal mistake. He never read my original employment contract, and the kill switch I left inside it was about to cost him absolutely everything. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is from r/MaliciousCompliance and is titled CEO fired me 24 hours before my bonus to save money. Huge mistake. So I had been with the tech company for 8 years when everything went sideways. I started as a junior developer and worked my way up to senior software architect, and honestly, I thought I had found my forever job. The work was challenging, sure, but the pay was decent and I had built some genuinely innovative systems that saved the company millions in operational costs. The company had grown from a scrappy startup to a major player in the enterprise software space. We had gone public 2 years prior and the stock price had been climbing steadily. I'd been there through the late nights, the crunch times, the celebrations when we landed big contracts, and I knew the codebase inside and out, and I had mentored dozens of junior developers and held several patents that were core to our flagship product. My contract was pretty standard for junior technical staff except for one clause that would prove to be extremely important later. The severance package was tied to my years of service and performance metrics with a multiplier based on company evaluation at time of termination. When I had negotiated this years earlier, our valuation was much lower, so nobody thought much about it. The HR person who approved it had long since moved on, and honestly, I'd almost forgotten about it myself. The trouble started when our CEO decided he wanted to streamline operations and bring in his own leadership team. This guy had been brought in about 18 months earlier to take us to the next level. He was one of those douchebags who spoke in corporate buzzwords and seemed to think that managing people was the same as managing spreadsheets. I should have seen the writing on the wall, to be honest, when he started scheduling one-on-one meetings with all the senior staff, and mine was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, exactly 24 hours before my annual performance bonus was supposed to hit my account. The meeting started normally enough. He asked about current projects, team dynamics, that sort of thing, but then he shifted gears. He said, "We are going through some organizational changes," he said, leaning back in his chair with that practiced executive smile. "The board has asked me to evaluate our cost structure, particularly in the engineering department." I nodded, figuring this was leading to budget discussions or maybe team restructuring. "Your role has been incredibly valuable to the company," he continued, "but we are moving now in a different direction. We need someone who can scale with our growth trajectory, someone with more recent management experience." It took me a second to process what he was saying. "Are you letting me go?" "We are eliminating your current position. Your last day will be tomorrow." The timing was obviously intentional. My bonus was calculated based on the company's performance over the fiscal year, which had been exceptional. We had exceeded all our targets, largely due to systems that I had designed and implemented. And the bonus was substantial, about $25,000. What about my annual bonus? It's literally being processed tomorrow. His expression didn't change. Unfortunately, company policy requires employees to be actively employed when bonuses are distributed. Since your termination will be effective before the distribution date, you won't be eligible for it. I felt my face getting hot. That's ridiculous. I worked the entire fiscal year. The performance metrics that bonus is based on include systems that I built. "I understand your frustration, but the policy is clear. However, we'll be providing a severance package based on your contract. You can either fight us over this or take it. It is your choice. You should comply with what we're offering." I left that meeting furious, but tried to keep things professional. I spent the rest of the day documenting my current projects and preparing handover notes. That evening I dug out my employment contract to review the severance terms, and that is when I found out the clause I had forgotten about. The severance calculation was based on a formula that included base salary, years of service, performance ratings, and company valuation. The valuation component was tied to either the most recent funding round or, if the company was public, the average stock price over the previous 90 days. When I had negotiated this contract, our valuation was around $50 million, and now after going public with our stock price climbing, the company was valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I did the math 3 times to make sure I was not missing anything, and based on my 8 years of service, consistently excellent performance reviews, and the current company valuation, my severance package came out to just over $1.5 million. So that's what I decided. I would not fight them over this. No, instead I would just comply with their offer, not make an issue out of it, and rather maliciously of course, and then enjoy the payout, which they probably were not expecting. The next morning I got to the office early. My access badge still worked, so I printed out copies of my contract, my performance reviews, and the recent filings showing the company's current valuation. I also grabbed screenshots of our stock price over the past quarter. The CEO called me into his office around 10 to make my termination official. "We'll be processing your severance according to your contract terms," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "This should cover the calculation and next steps." I opened the folder. Inside was a severance offer for 12 weeks of pay, basically 3 months of my base salary. "This does not match my contract," I said, pulling out my copy of the employment agreement. He barely glanced at it. "That's the standard severance package for your level." "But my contract specifies a different calculation method." "Our legal team reviewed your file." "This is what you're entitled to." I flipped to the relevant page and pointed to the specific clause. Well, it clearly states that severance is calculated using this formula, which includes company valuation as a multiplier. For the first time, he looked actually uncomfortable. "Let me have our legal team have another look at this. I already did the calculation," I said, sliding my own paperwork across the desk. "Based on my years of service, performance ratings, and the current company valuation, the severance amount should be approximately $1.5 million. Well, let me tell you, the color completely drained from his face. He stared at the numbers for a long moment. "This cannot be right. No severance package is worth that much." According to the contract I signed and the company approved, it is. He started flipping through my contract, clearly looking for some escape clause or something. "We will need to have our attorneys review this thoroughly." That's fine of course, but until this is resolved, I will need confirmation in writing that my termination is on hold, since you cannot process it without finalizing the severance terms. That is when I saw the real panic in his eyes. He was clearly realizing that he had created a massive problem for himself. "The board does not know about this clause," he said almost to himself. Well, they are about to. Over the next few days, I got a few calls from the company's legal team, the CFO, and eventually a board member. They tried every angle they could think of basically to get out of paying the full severance amount. First, they claimed the valuation multiplier was meant to be based on the company's value when I was hired, not when I was terminated. However, I pointed out that the contract language was pretty clear. It specified current company valuation with no ambiguity. Then they argued that my performance ratings didn't qualify me for the full multiplier. I had 8 years of performance reviews, all of which were exceeding expectations or even higher. They even tried to claim that my termination was for cause, which would have voided the severance entirely, but that lasted about 5 minutes before they realized they had no documentation to support any kind of cause-based termination. The best part was when they suggested that the contract had a typo and the valuation multiplier should have been kept. I reminded them that their legal team had reviewed and approved the contract when I signed it years earlier. If there was an error, that was on them. Meanwhile though, word was getting around the office about what was happening, and the CEO had been bragging to other executives about his cost-cutting move, apparently not realizing how badly it was gonna backfire on him. When people found out he had tried to cheat me out of my bonus only to trigger a severance payment that was much larger, the story spread like wildfire. The final straw came when the board discovered that the CEO had made the termination decision unilaterally without consulting them or the legal team. He had been so focused on the short-term savings from my salary and bonus that he had never bothered to check what the actual cost of firing me would be. After 2 weeks of back and forth, their attorneys finally admitted that the contract was ironclad, the severance calculation was mathematically correct, and they had no legal basis to refuse the payment. The CEO tried to negotiate a reduced payment in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement, but I declined. Seriously, at this point, it was not just about the money, it was about the principle. He tried to cheat me out of money I had legitimately earned, and I wanted him to face the full consequences of his actions. The CFO called me personally to try to work out some kind of compromise. "Look, we both know this was not the intent of the contract clause. Can't we find a middle ground here?" The intent of the clause was to provide fair compensation based on the company's success, which I helped build. And the company now is worth 30 times what it was when I signed this contract, largely due to systems and processes I developed. This payout reflects that contribution. The board is furious. This is gonna show up in our quarterly earnings report. Well, maybe the board should be furious with the CEO, who made this decision without understanding the financial implications. In the end, they had no choice but to pay the full amount, but the story doesn't end here. According to some friends in the company, the board started asking questions about how this situation had occurred in the first place. They discovered that the CEO had been making similar unilateral decisions in other areas, often without proper review or consultation. The severance payment to me was just the most expensive example of his poor judgment. Within 2 months he was out. Officially he decided to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew he had been forced to resign. The company now also implemented new policies requiring board approval for any termination of senior staff, and all existing employment contracts were reviewed to identify similar potential issues. As for me though, I took some time off to figure out my next move, and the severance payment was substantial enough that I did not need to rush into anything. Eventually, I started my own consulting company, focusing on the same type of enterprise software systems that I'd been building before. And yeah guys, my opinion about this story: imagine being the lawyer who approved that contract back in the startup days. He probably got paid like $500 to review it, wrote "looks fine" and then moved on. And now that same clause just paid out 3,000 times what they charged. That lawyer is either getting blamed for everything or claiming that they are a secret genius. There's no in between. The funniest part to me though is that this CEO probably had a whole little victory lap planned in his head, all like, "Look at me, I saved $25,000 before bonus season," and then legal comes back like, "Well, actually, you just bought this man a house." And now guys, some comments from Reddit. The first one said, "I cannot help but feel like you went nuclear when you could have negotiated something reasonable. But yeah, the contract technically entitled you to 1.5 million, but you know that was not the spirit of the agreement when it was written. The company probably would have settled for your bonus plus 6 months severance and a good reference, and you would still come out ahead without tanking their quarterly earnings. Instead, you chose scorched earth, which makes sense emotionally, but was not exactly the mature route. The CEO sucks way more, of course, for starting this whole mess, and the board sucks for hiring him, but you had opportunities to be the bigger person, and you chose revenge instead. Sometimes being legally right does not mean that you are morally right. That being said though, I probably would have done the exact same thing, so maybe I'm just projecting my own pettiness here. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you would have done instead." And another comment from Reddit said, "The part that gets me is how the CEO was apparently bragging to other executives about his so-called cost cutting before he knew about the severance calculation. Imagine being that confident that you pulled off some genius move and then finding out that you just lit $1.5 million on fire. I bet those conversations got real quiet real fast." And the next one is a fantastic malicious compliance story, which is titled, "Want me to work for my interview? Okay, here you go." So background, I mostly work in a niche-ish area of law called discovery. Basically, when someone starts a legal proceeding, each party gets to ask other parties for certain documents relevant to the case. Sometimes parties refuse to produce certain documents because of reasons like attorney-client privilege. I argue why my client's documents are properly withheld or the other side's documents are improperly withheld. One day, I see a job board post from a local firm looking for a research/writing position with required experience in discovery disputes. This raises a red flag for 2 reasons. First, local law firms normally don't need to hire full-time R&W people, because over 95% of that firm's cases are very similar. In other words, a personal injury firm normally only handles personal injury cases, so keeping a full-time researcher is not really worthwhile when all your cases are basically the same. When these local firms need something researched, they either just do it themselves or pay someone else for a few hours of work. Second, this local firm hired a friend of mine by telling them, "Start here, work hard, and move up to senior associate in a few years," before promptly letting them go after a few busy months. I go ahead and send my resume over and get scheduled for an interview pretty quickly. During the interview, I gave them a fairly high salary ask, which they agreed to almost instantly, and then the partner hits me with the following: "Partner, we ask all candidates to provide a writing sample before the final interview. Me, sure thing, I thought I attached one to the application, but let me grab my phone and double check. P, oh, not that writing sample, that is too generic for evaluation. Here's a legal question that we want you to research. Me, I see. More than happy to do that at an hourly rate. P, it should be fairly quick work. No other candidate has asked us for writing sample compensation, and this makes it seem like you won't be a team player. If you're not interested in the position, just tell us. Me, let me think about it. So I go home and search a couple of local court dockets, and wouldn't you know it, this firm is involved in a case with a hearing set on exactly the discovery question they want me to produce a free writing sample on. So I sent an email back saying, sure thing, I will make the writing sample, so long as it guarantees consideration for the R&W position. And they say yes. I write a fantastic memo and send it in. A few weeks go by and I email asking for an update on the final interview, but there was no response. Then I check that court docket and wouldn't you know it, they straight up copy and pasted parts of my memo in the response. So I sent a demand letter for payment and fees, but no response once again. I file a lawsuit for fraud, and oh baby, then I got a response. A frothy, salty response. Frothatly, I got called some names. They went on and on about how I was gonna lose, and after I lost how they were gonna counter-sue me, I said, sounds good, cannot wait to lose. I guess you did hire a full-time R&W attorney. I mean, it would be like Babytown Frolics easy to win if you never hired for that position. Actually, it would be even easier if you never even had a final interview for the spot, but I'm sure you are not that dumb though. Got the check 30 days later. And the next one is another malicious compliance story, which is a little bit different, but it is titled, You want the exact amount? You get the exact amount. So when I was 13 or 14, I decided I wanted a PS3. My dad refused to buy me one, but my uncle made me an offer I could not refuse. He said that if I worked at his sweets shop for the 2 months of summer break, he would buy me a PS3 and some games in lieu of payment. For teenage me with no commitments, this seemed fantastic. My uncle sold a kind of specialty snack known as a mini samosa in his shop. They are basically like samosas but smaller, about 3.5 to 4 centimeters in size, about 2,286 of a football field for my American friends, and they were sold by weight in sealed packs of 250 grams and 500 grams, as these were the most common amounts people bought. Making those packages turned out to be my job. You see, sometime between now and when Uncle started his business, he realized that 250 grams was roughly the weight of 28 mini samosas, and thus 56 were 500 grams. So instead of weighing each packet, I was told to just pack by counting individual items, which was easier and saved time. We also sold them individually for people who wanted larger, smaller, or unusual amounts. This was also around the time when our government in India started airing customer awareness PSAs. Basically just telling customers to beware of fraudulent business people. This is relevant. So one particularly hot afternoon, it was just me and my uncle at the shop, and in India frequent power cuts were very common during summers, and thus were no fans or AC running. Both tempers and temperatures were running high at the shop that day. It was then that the villain of our story, Mr. Karen, made his entry. He was a local resident and a regular. He seemed angry from the onset when he barged into the shop. He took a look at the fans and saw that they were not running, then angrily picked up a 500-gram pack of samosas and asked, "How many samosas are in this thing?" "That is 500 grams, I said. "I said, how many? Not how much." Mr. Karen literally screamed, "Again, how many in this?" 56, I replied immediately, since you know, I packed them. "How can you be so sure you didn't even count? You're trying to cheat me, huh?" Mr. Karen was now in full-scale Karen mode. "I demand you pack me 500 grams of those individual ones, and don't you dare cheat me again." I looked over at my uncle, wet with sweat, fanning himself with yesterday's newspaper. He slowly nodded and I beamed a huge smile. "Sure sir, whatever you want." So I took a big bag, picked up some samosas and started putting them on the balance. I kept counting samosas as I put them in until they were a little over 500 grams, then I removed the last samosa and the weight fell below 500. Now, keeping eye contact with Mr. Karen, I crushed the samosa and started putting its powdery remains in the bag until it was exactly 500 grams. But wait, there's more. Mr. Karen apparently didn't seem to mind powdered samosas, but instead he asked smugly, "So, how many samosas now, huh?" 48, I claimed triumphantly. You see, sometime in the past my uncle's old chef retired and the new chef made samosas with a little bit more filling in them. They looked the same size on the outside and only weighed a couple grams more each, and since he made them in bulk and also sold to other shops in the area, the price was not too much of an issue. So my uncle let it slide, but those couple grams added up on mass orders, and that is what Mr. Karen found out the hard way. He looked sheepishly at the pre-packed samosas and then at his own package and asked if he could buy the former instead. No, my nephew made a package specifically for you at your own request, so that's what you gotta buy, my uncle finally spoke. Mr. Karen silently took his pack, paid and left. He was a lot more respectful during his subsequent visits. Also, I was reminded of this story yesterday when my PS3 finally died. As evident, English is not my first language, in fact it's not even my third, so please excuse any mistakes. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. There is a lot to unpack in this story, so I suggested you get comfortable. Before I can talk about how I managed to destroy the HOA, I need to talk about the circumstances and events that caused me to be involved with them to begin with. So when I got my piece of land, there wasn't any houses on it or anything, the whole area was empty and lots were being sold for great prices. So I bought one and planned to build myself a house on it. At the same time, my brother was having issues with housing and money, so we figured that a great solution would just be to split off some of my land and give it to him. He would build his own small house and not need to worry about as many costs. I did legally get the land split, but both were in my name. The plan was to transfer it to my brother at a later time. The second house never got built on the property because my brother changed his mind and got back together with his girlfriend, moving away to live with her. I wrote the whole thing off my mind and honestly forgot that my land was technically 2 properties, at the moment a meaningless fact, but it will be extremely important later on. So basically at some point an HOA was formed in the neighborhood and I didn't want to be a part of it. Everybody else seemed to jump on the wagon, but I had zero interest in them. I have been on the internet long enough to hear the horror stories about HOAs and knew that joining was just gonna drain me of money at best and cause me serious problems at worst. That did not stop them from asking over and over to get me on board. My plot was the first house on the road that led into the community, which was part of why they wanted me to join. They wanted to make it more safe and closed off from random people getting to come in. They wanted one of those manned gates that they lifted up and the cars can go in and out. A structure that could not solely be built in the street, it would need to be on my property to work out. And without me joining the HOA, they could not make up some dumb rule making me let them use part of my land. They must have really wanted to stay closed off because they asked me straight out what it would take for me to be a part of the HOA, so the entire neighborhood was in it and use my land for an entrance area. I told them that I would do it if I could only be part of the HOA in name, meaning that I didn't need to follow the bylaws and could do what I pleased. They could then use the land and claim my house as a member, getting them what they needed. I don't know why having every home involved seemed a matter of life and death to them, but I took it to my advantage. Making a deal with the HOA is similar to making a deal with the devil. It's a bad idea and you will always end up being the one screwed over in the end. The first thing they did was flat out lie to me about how much of my land they were gonna need. They just did not want a small edge to build the gate on. Actually, they wanted to put a sign with the name of the neighborhood and that also got stuck on my property. Finally, they built a very small, I guess you would call it a hut, where the guards they hired could relax and the HOA board could meet and discuss things. When I questioned them about all these extra things, they told me that the use of the entire section of that land was in the contract. It was not that I didn't read the contract, it was just written so complicated and I really thought I understood what it was talking about. I told them that I wasn't okay with all of this and people just being on my property all the time. However, they did not seem to care and told me to basically go and shove it. The second thing they did was basically go against what they told me only a few months after. I started getting letters in the mail telling me that I owed them HOA fees. Something that we had agreed I would not be paying since I was only meant to be a member in name. Then I got a bunch of fines in the mail all in one go. They wanted me to make extreme changes to my house that I was not okay with. I had a deck they wanted gone as well and a second floor balcony, claiming that they weren't allowed as part of the HOA bylaws. It kept going on too. My outdoor decorations were in violation, my door was not up to their code. In total, they wanted me to pay thousands in fees. All the while, I was never meant to have to pay them a cent or follow their rules. I contacted a lawyer and took them to court for going against what they told me and the contract. They had their own big shot lawyer that looked just as smug as he sounded. I'm just gonna call him A-hole lawyer or AL for short. A-hole lawyer said, "The contract clearly states that being exempt from the bylaws can be revoked." My lawyer, you need a reason to enact that part of the contract, not to mention a 60-day letter of notice. AL, we have a valid reason to revoke the claims. The HOA is not using the full extent of the land being given. In addition, that portion of the land has been being maintained by the HOA out of pocket instead of the property owner. Finally, we have decided that it's unfair to the rest of the community for one member to be an exception. The judge said that technically the HOA was allowed to revoke it and start treating me like every other HOA member. The fines I was given had to be taken away since I was not given proper notice, but once they sent me the 60 days notice, they apparently could start sending me fines for anything they wanted basically. It was a scummy and dirty move on the part of the HOA, and I did get that letter, and then 60 days later on the dot another copy of all the fines. You might wonder why I did not spend the 60 days getting to my house in accordance with the rules so they couldn't charge me with anything, and at first that was my plan as well. The court had basically told me too bad the HOA won, and having a lawyer scan through my contract, I couldn't do much about the fact that I signed a section of my land to them, not realizing the extent of what I had done. And by the way, Ripestars, as far as I can understand so far, OP basically made this pact with the devil just because they promised him more security by having a little hut with a security guard or something, and I suppose that's why OP started all of this. I guess if they did not try to screw him over, it might have been a decent deal. Anyway, we did find one thing that changed everything, and I was gonna use it to make their lives a living hell. And I was going to get the rest of my property back even if I had to destroy them completely. Now, I think most HOAs go off of an address when it comes to members. Since this HOA formed before the plots were all filled with houses, they had to do things a little bit different. They went off of some property identification number. I don't know exactly what it is or means, but basically they had to give the land a serial code since they didn't all have an address yet. Not even all the roads were named before the HOA had started to develop. This is important because of what I talked about in the beginning with splitting my property with the plan of a small portion going to my brother. The property ID number on the contract I had with the HOA, a match not for where my house is built and I live, but for the small portion of property I split, and they were currently using. Now I can finally talk about how I destroyed the HOA by complying with everything they said. I turned into the best HOA member the world had ever seen, making sure all the right people had to pay for going against guidelines and getting justice. I decided it would be funnier to just not do anything and wait until the time was up for them to start sending me notices. Then ignoring them until they were angry and coming to me telling me that they were going to take me to court and possibly put a lien on my house if I didn't comply with their bylaws. The following conversation was absolutely legendary. HOA guys, we are done trying to chase you down. There are several violations regarding your house and we will not stand around and let you ignore them. You got your 60-day warning and we need to discuss what's gonna happen about all of these violations. Me, I agree. I'm personally upset about all the violations I can see right outside of my very window. I'm honored that the HOA wants me to help them solve the problem. HOA, what are you talking about? Me, the property that is in all of the bylaw violations. HOA, your property and house. Me, I meant the many violations I see on the property I signed over to you per our contract. The land is yours and you pushed for it to be part of the HOA, so it seems only logical that you need to follow your own rules. I for one noticed that the grass is getting very long and that hut does not seem up to code for an HOA structure. HOA, what are you going off about? Your house is the problem we need to talk about. Stop messing around. Me, actually, if you take a look at the contract, my house is not part of the property listed. It's separate and my house is in land that is not part of the HOA. They were beyond angry and saying that since both areas of land were mine, it meant both were part of the HOA. I checked with a lawyer and that simply was not the case. In addition, since they tried to screw me in the contract stating that a section of land was being signed to them and that same section being the entire split property, they were now the owners and responsible for it. Plus, it was in the HOA meaning that it had to follow all of the rules and laws. The first thing being that little hut had to go. You are allowed a shed or hut type structure as long as a house was the primary building on the property. No house and no room to build one meant that it had to come down. They also had to start maintaining the grass and trees on that property, paying property taxes on it, and everything else. They did not want to do all of that or follow their own rules. They tried to argue that the land was mine and I had just leased it out to them. Which honestly is what I thought at first I was doing, but since they wanted to be sneaky and try to steal my land, they could have it. And they got it plus all the problems that went with it. I was not letting them ignore these problems either, making sure to bring it up very publicly to everybody else. asking why the HOA could own land, breaking rules and getting special treatment when they are the same as we are. People agreed and the HOA was forced to comply with their own rules. Watching a group get angry about needing to follow rules that they made to me is one of the funniest things ever. Maybe I'm just easily amused. I was not done ruining their lives because I had another thing up my sleeve. My house was not part of the HOA, meaning as long as I stayed within the actual law, I could do anything I wanted on my property. I created a huge display on my property with lights and just anything I found at the store that could make it look tacky and annoying. I painted polka dots on my door and got an outrageous looking mailbox. I did not do any of this because I'm an eccentric person either, I did it because I'm the first house that people see when they are coming into the community. Friends and relatives would be confused and shocked seeing that kind of home in what is meant to be a nice gated community. Plus, people coming in to try and buy a home were now greeted with this as a first impression. I don't care how good every other house is. You are not going to forget something like that. Finally though, I got a sign on my own and put it on my lawn for all to see. I had it made and it said, "Warning, toxic HOA ahead." I'll admit that I was maybe having a little too much fun and I didn't plan to keep all of that stuff going, I just wanted to make a point and get the HOA scared and regret messing with me in the first place. I wanted to run them into the ground, not the entire neighborhood though. The people did nothing wrong and most, when asking me what I was doing, understood after I explained the situation to them. It did not take long for the HOA to come crawling back to me, begging to make a deal. After one deal from them screwed me over, I was not going to make the same mistake twice. I made sure a lawyer looked over what they proposed to me to make sure that I was not going to be the one getting screwed over this time. They were offering to have the plot of land they use on my property to be officially leased out. They would maintain the property and pay me monthly for the rights to use it. And if they stopped paying, I had the right to basically evict them off of it, taking away the sign and gate and everything else. They also had in the contract that the correct property that held my house would be part of the HOA, having the same exact crap as before about me being exempt from the rules. But this time the only thing added was that I still needed to keep my property within a reasonable state. I rejected this because they were going to do the same thing and revoke the exemptions. So my lawyer made several changes and sent it back to them, with the exemptions to the HOA bylaws being set in stone where they could not be revoked, putting down the specific bylaws I was willing to agree to. Which was reasonable ones like keeping the grass mowed and basically getting rid of the disaster I created. Also changed was that I wanted back pay for all the time they had used the land since they got it. I think they wanted to argue more but were in just a tight spot and forced to agree to my demands. I had the HOA in my back pocket and was excited to see where this entire thing would go. Sadly, things went wrong for them shortly after all of the dust settled. I wasn't the only person they were giving fines to that people didn't think were fair. Suddenly to them an HOA did not sound like a good idea at all. Many people had issues with friends and family not being able to get it, the HOA dues being too expensive and them not really getting any benefit from it. People were demanding to leave the HOA and because of me they lost a lot of money on paying me and their legal fees. They were going into the negative and the only thing they could do was get rid of the HOA. With that went the contract and I had my land basically how it was before. That HOA might have been doomed from the start, but I want to take credit for at least being the main reason that they had to shut down. They wanted to act toxic to me, not realizing that I was going to make their lives hell if they messed with me. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. In January 2021, I began working for a very big American company in Europe that was and is in the energy sector. At the factory plant I began working at, the parts of gas turbines get assessed for restoration and reworked so they can get used again. Each single part would cost several thousands when produced new and hold on for like a decade or so. Reworking costs like 1/4 of that and the part would be good for another 8 to 10 years with more inspections of course for safety. The customers would pay like half or 3/4 of the cost of a new part, and since we talk 2,000 to 8,000 per single part and a gas turbine containing thousands of pieces, we are talking about several millions for each gas turbine. The customer would save a good chunk and of course the company was sitting on a golden goose. Over the decades, that meant that the facility where the stuff was reworked had an absolute uncontested income without much of a competition, since the parts were their own design and production and a win-win for customer and company. Over time, that led to the problem that competence, invention or even honesty were not needed by the management of the facility anymore. As long as the workers stick to the already developed and tested processes and did their job, money would keep flowing in regardless what the office did or didn't. You can see where this is going. So the setup, somewhat important. I was hired there as part of quality control. Specifically, I was to operate a 3D computer managed measuring machine. Gas turbines get, as you can imagine, pretty hot and spin very fast. And a decade of heat combined with dynamic stress has the nasty habit to deform stuff. Cannot have that for sure, so you have to measure the stuff really precisely so that the production knows what section of which piece needs reworking, or if a piece is too out of form to be used again at all. The operation of such a machine is not too complicated. Put the piece into the bracket, clamp it down, load the correct model, and start the program. You get the measurement report and then as a text file, an Excel as well as a PDF. The pieces, usually rotary blades, nearly always came in sets, 24 to 216 depending on the size. When all are measured, you compile all the reports the machine made into one Excel file with a somewhat complicated method. Wasn't hard, I learned that all in a week. And well, that machine was immensely important for the facility, running in 2 to 3 shifts per day, 6 days per week. Like 80% of all pieces that went through the reworking process had to be measured at least twice. As nearly anyone with a technical background can guess, operating a machine and understanding what it's actually doing are two big different shoes. When I started, there were only 3 guys that understood the machine properly, as well as a technician, Vladimir, who could actually fix codes or reprogram a 3D model if there was a problem. Vladimir, however, was the technician for the entire facility, a very busy guy, and when he had to come over, his time would need to be paid by the department, something the bosses didn't encourage, so to say. Of the 3 guys who knew the machine, Antonio is important. He had been working there for a few centuries at least, knew every nook and cranny, and while being a simple worker, if crap went wrong, he was the guy you turned to. He had a bit of a short temper and a very blunt language, but he was honest, open and very fair. I myself am not the most social person, always held back with a brutal honesty, and I take my professional cold attitude a bit too serious, I guess. In general, if people share my principles of honesty, fairness and taking responsibility serious, then we get along greatly, but with people that are, let's just say, less trustworthy, I basically turn to an ice block. Not perfect, I know, but hey, I don't work in retail for good reason. So the thing is, despite some heated arguments, Antonio and me really got along swimmingly. What no one knew was that Antonio had, over the decades, collected such a backlog of days off, overtime and whatnot, that he could retire 2 years early, and he was 63. And by the way guys, I'm curious, since I know that my audience is pretty international, meaning not only Americans, Europeans and whatnot, is retiring at 63 considered early in your country? Let us know in the comments when people retire where you are from. Anyway, he had decided to groom me as his successor and began teaching me every little detail about the measuring machine, how to fix stuff, how to do proper maintenance, why it did certain stuff, and so on. He was a perfectionist, but so am I, what I really appreciated. What I noticed in my first week in the company was the biggest problem there. The facility had a massive problem with cliques, clans, and little circles. If you were part of the correct clique, you could do what you want and remain untouchable. If you aren't though, well, your credit goes to anyone but you, and you are a fine scapegoat. I didn't care much about it, to be honest. I'm a bit of a rule fanatic and stick to them even when everyone else ignores them. For me, this was a well-paying job with a horrible commute, so I wanted to stay there for as long as I could, earn my money, and then just take the next job. There was a 4th guy who was operating the machine. I don't remember his name, so let's call him Igor. Igor was part of the same clique as my boss, Manuel, and my boss's boss, Freddy, and of course his own boss, Boris, who by the way was also his brother. He was working the measuring machine, simple because it was the most comfortable job he could perform. He was usually doing the night shift as those paid extra. He occasionally took the late shift while I always took the early one, was the least popular due to the start at 6 AM, but I liked going home at 3 PM. Igor was well, as Lightbulb, he was always like a wet match in a dark basement somewhere in a black hole. I might be a bit too harsh with him now, but that was all I ever got to see from him. He was also pretty lazy, rude and arrogant, and after all, he had an untouchable status due to his brother's best friend being boss of the entire assessment department. Now onto the actual story. Long build up, I know. A good 6 months after I started, there was the first incident with the measuring machine. We received the material in pallets, and it was the firm rule that the rotary blades had to be sorted in numerical order. Each had a serial number and a set number. Stuff went a ton faster and easier if all was sorted clean, 1 to 82 or whatever the set went up to. Occasionally an order, which were usually 2 to 4 pallets, would arrive unsorted at the measuring machine, and then we had to sort them. Since we had to lift the blades out one by one anyway to measure them, it was not that big of a deal, just a tad bit annoying. Igor never finished a set if he could help it, leaving just 1 or 2 blades left for measuring, and even when he had to finish a set and start a new one, he would never compile the reports into one Excel. I'm pretty sure he didn't even know how that worked. One morning I came to work and, like so often, there was just 3 blades left to measure. I shrugged without care and wanted to just finish the order and start the next one. Problem was, the pallets were a complete mess, completely unsorted despite them being measured. Igor had worked the late shift the day before and would also work the late shift that day, so I would actually get to see him for a few minutes when I handed my shift over. This of course meant that I would have to sort all of the pallets while also operating the machine with the next order as to avoid a delay. The machine was a bit of a bottleneck in the facility, usually it's a chill post. The blades are never heavier than 22 kilograms, maybe 48 pounds, and you had like 6 to 14 minutes between the measurement cycles to lift them out and exchange them with the last measured blade. Sorting the last order took me around 2 hours of quite sweaty work while also operating the machine nearby, so I was somewhat annoyed. When Igor came in the afternoon, I asked him in a polite manner why he hadn't sorted that one order. He replied in quite a rude tone that he wouldn't do that. I was a bit baffled and asked if he didn't know that it was mandatory to do that. He simply replied in a pretty rude tone again that he wouldn't speak about that. Outright refusing to speak about a problem? What the hell? I told him that if he didn't want to speak about it, I would have to speak about it with my boss. He just smiled in a smug fashion and told me to do that. Well, I did just that. Asked my boss about it in the fashion of, hey, I thought we were supposed to sort that stuff, or did we change that? This led to a 4-way talk with my boss Igor as well as Boris. Boris was not happy at all, and my boss was rather embarrassed because it was all clear that I was correct, but neither of them wanted to admit that their friend had done anything wrong. I did my usual ice block impression, showing a blank face, replying in a very accurate and short words, and staying all polite and professional. It came out rather inconclusive, with a kind request that we should please sort the pallets if they came in as a mess. Igor shrugged, and it was clear that he did not care. It happened 3 more times that stuff came in unsorted, but Igor managed to avoid doing it ever. Okay, strike 1 out of 3, 6 weeks later there was the second incident. Every morning before I started, I would maintain the machine like Antonio had showed me to do, cleaning everything and rubbing special liquid into stone thread the machine's arch ran back and forth on. One morning I came in and turned the machine into manual mode like every morning, so that I could run the arch to the end of the thread for maintenance. A second thereafter, I heard a grinding noise and instantly stopped the machine. The arch was an air cushion based runner, kind of like a hovercraft, as where the bottom of the arch would always remain a tiny bit above the surface to ensure minimum vibration. So a grinding sound means it's really bad. I quickly inspected the thread and found quite the deep crater in the stone surface, maybe 2 to 3 centimeters deep, an inch, and wide, that was enough for the air cushion to lose pressure, so the arch was sliding over the stone surface of the thread. This inspection also revealed scratches along nearly the entire length of the thread, so it was pretty clear that the machine had been running with this crater for a good bit. Immediately shut down the machine, informed Vladimir as well as my boss that some big crap was going on here. I also took pictures of the damage with the timestamps just out of my usual paranoia. The machine was put out of commission, and as the arch had taken damage, the entire stone thread had to be reworked and the machine needed recalibration. It was out for over a month due to that crater. That crater, by the way, looked exactly like the bottom corner of one of the blades, as if one had been dropped onto the stone thread and the previous shift before me had, drumrolls, Igor. Of course, he denied that he had done anything wrong, and he could also not recall seeing any scratches or hear any grinding noise during his shift. He tried to blame it on me, but I had reported the stuff like 5 minutes in my shift, with the last blade Igor had measured still in the machine. Again, it was clear to all who had effed up, but again, not even a harsh word to him. While the machine was getting fixed and reworked, we were put to different work. I got into the pre-assessment team where the pieces get their first evaluation. I made good friends there, which would serve as my ears later on. Strike 2 out of 3, after the machine got fixed a good month later, we had collected a massive backlog to the point that other departments who did the repair were struggling to find something to do that did not need measurements. The machine was supposed to work in 3 shifts, but Antonio had left for his 2-year vacation when the machine had been put out for repairs, and the other 2 colleagues who knew how to run and maintain the machine had left for better jobs. So it was only me and Igor by then, with me working quite some overtime for good pay, all BS aside, hourly wage was really proper. And then one morning I noticed something pretty weird. The order I had just started the previous afternoon was still not finished, again with just 2 blades remaining. Every measurement report has a timestamp, which I quickly had a look into. The measurement cycle for these was like 3 minutes plus 1 minute, exchanging 1 blade for the next one. For some reason, the measurement reports from Igor's shift had like 10 to 15 minutes gaps in between, some even half an hour. Igor himself was still around as he had the night shift. I knew he was a bit of a slacker, but these gaps were quite big, so I first thought there had been trouble with the machine. I asked him if he had any trouble with the machine last night, and he snapped at me that all had been fine. I asked if he was sure, and he in return inquired why I asked. I told him that there were quite some heavy gaps in between the measurement report and that I could not find any error messages of sudden stops or such. Igor looked at those timestamps for a moment, then back at me, and just shrugged before he went home. That would have been the end of it if it wouldn't have been even stranger the next shift on Monday. I had for once not worked on Saturday, so Igor had 3 shifts since I had last clocked out. And well, I came in as usual, did the maintenance and cleaning and wanted to check how far he had gotten. 4 orders had went through since my last shift, so I assumed that, as usual, I would have to compile the reports. However, there were none. I was pretty confused judging the orders numbers, checking the machine protocol and all. And the measuring machine had been running over the weekend with no shutdown or restart visible in the log, but also no measurement reports at all. What I did was, I called in Vladimir, as 4 orders worth of reports missing is a big deal. According to rules, I also informed my boss that the machine was standstill due to technical issues. Both Vladimir and my boss came into the measuring room and we 3 searched for the problem. It took us a while to figure it out, simply to it being absolutely not expected. Someone had turned off the output of the machine, maybe to avoid the timestamps. This once again caused quite some ruckus, as well as 4 orders had to be measured again with reports, and production was really struggling now to have something to work on. Again, all clear who had screwed up, and finally Freddy had enough, but not of Igor. Now onto the malicious compliance. The afternoon of the same day, Freddy, the boss of the entire assessment department, came into my measuring room, nice expensive suit, tie, polished shoes, and went straight into my face. I was currently sitting in my chair compiling the results of the remeasured first order when he stood before me, giving me no room to get up. He looked down on me and snapped at me that he was sick and tired of me bullying my coworkers. He handed me a letter which were the signed papers of my contract's termination, signed by him of course. He informed me that I had exactly 2 options now. I could either promise to do better, apologize to my coworker Igor and admit that I was at fault, or I would simply be fired immediately. Well, the good thing of being bullied and terrorized for most of your childhood is that you learn to keep a cool head under stress. So I reined in my first urge to discuss with him or to tell him that such was illegal. Instead, I took the letter and read through it before nodding a few times. Due to my cold professional attitude, I was known for often remaining silent, so he took my nods as my compliance. He then informed me that he awaited my written apology before 2 PM. All of the bosses went home by 2 PM and came in around 8 or 9. Well, when he turned around and marched out with a smug grin, he left me with the termination letter with his signature on it. Fun fact, when both parties agree to it, a contract can be cancelled immediately without any further responsibilities beside paying for already issued hours, which go directly through human resources via the electronic timestamps of our clocking. I had 2 hours left until his deadline, and I spent it to carefully clean my workplace, make a backup of my work laptop according to the rules, and then, also according to the rules, clean the hard drive completely. The backup was put into the assigned server with all data correctly named and compiled, but of course the server for backup data is marked as unsearchable as to avoid your search list getting cluttered, and after all the same parts, types came in again and again with the same material numbers of course. If you know the rules and knew where to search, You would find the stuff within 20 seconds. If not, well, good luck, mate. It's only like 10 terabytes or so. I made a copy of the termination paper signed by me now and sent them to my email, which was allowed, put the original back into the envelope and packed my things up. Then I went up to the office, envelope in hand. The big boss showed his smug smile again the moment he saw me, but was quickly confused when he saw me with my laptop, work phone and all that too. I handed him the letter, offered a polite nod and turned around again. He shouted where the hell I was going, him still holding the envelope in his hand. You terminated my contract. According to the rules, I am to hand over all personal equipment I had been handed by the company before leaving. Exception ACC to paragraph B are safety shoes and safety glasses. I bid you a fine day, Mr. Freddy. I said that with a cold, calculated voice, trying my best to sound like a lawyer, simply because I knew he hated my professional attitude. Then I went to my own boss and piled my stuff on his desk. My boss was confused as hell, asking me what was up. I briefly informed him that my contract was terminated and that once more quoted the rule. My boss was a smug a-hole too, but he was not all dumb. His eyes went big as he immediately realized that I was the only person he had left that actually knew how to maintain and properly operate the measuring machine. And that he had such a backlog already that other departments relying on the measurements had started to enforce short-time work. He was first lost for words and then rushed into Freddy's office to see that termination letter. Meanwhile, I changed my clothes in the locker room, went to the gate and asked the security to please have a full inspection of my person and my backpack. This was likewise regulation for personnel that was terminated on short notice, and while the security guards were pretty baffled that I asked to be searched, they complied with it. They searched me fully and handed me a written confirmation that I had nothing on me that belonged to the company. My now ex-boss tried to call me all the time on my way home, but I dislike having phone calls in public transport, so I simply muted them and continued reading my book until I got home. There, 4 PM by now, so well past his own time to go home. I finally answered his call. He tried to convince me that I needed this job and that all this could be sorted out. My reply? I will have a new job within a week. You will need to take at least a month to train someone new on the machine. If you had anyone that could train a new person, I tell you what. Just give me a solid contract with triple the pay and I will come back. Oh, and also I want a written apology from Freddy, too, as well as my piece when working. He told me that I was completely unreasonable with such demands, again me, so to get this clear, 3 times I discover massive BS happening, 3 times you guys try to heap the blame on me, and then you guys literally try to humiliate me and Freddy does actually fire me, and you want me to be reasonable? Well, guess it would be reasonable then to just ignore you, please be well. I hung up then and blocked his number, as well as any other number with which he could try to call me on later. The aftermath of all of this. As I had mentioned before, I still had ears in the company, so I have a good idea what followed. The facility suddenly had turned its most sensitive bottleneck tightened even further and then clogged full of concrete soon after. No one maintained or cleaned the measuring machine anymore, and being a precision machine, it didn't take that lightly. Vladimir was soon called in multiple times a day to fix a problem, which in return built up a backlog for him in other places. Things I, or previously Antonio, had fixed within a minute now took hours. Just for Vladimir to find time to come over and fix it in a minute. He tried explaining stuff to Igor, but yeah, that didn't work well. Other departments ran completely dry of work, and of course they did not want to bear the blame for missed deadlines, so the whole issue was pretty quickly reported up the ladder. And with no one wanting to take the hit, it climbed higher and higher before it was eventually gotten onto the desk of the national CEO of the company, the highest entity of the company this side of the Great Pond. Found that out via a friend in HR. What followed was the arrival of the proverbial kill squad, you know, the modern equivalent to an executor, a bunch of guys in very tight suits, no sense of humor, cold eyes and the strict command to find someone's head to put on a silver plate. As far as I heard, even a prosecutor from the USA was among them. I was called by the company a month later, asking if I would come in for an interview, not a job interview mind you, but they would ask me to give a statement on the whole affair. This was not a legal thing and they had no way to force me to make a statement, as it was an internal investigation. But I still happily complied and even gave my signature that I told the truth. I gave them the entire story as accurate as I could and openly admitted what I didn't know or where I was only guessing. They thanked me and apologized, honestly I felt it, that they could not pay me for the time they took from me due to legal reasons. I was all fine with that and went home. Igor got fired for careless negligence, his brother Boris likewise got the immediate boot in the rear. My boss went down under as well. He and Boris were fired for mismanagement. Their boss, however, Freddy, he got not only fired, but got dragged in front of the court. No idea how that went on, as he was dragged to the United States. But given how ridiculous that justice system is, and that he had been designated as a scapegoat by one of the biggest companies worldwide, I would not be surprised if he had to hold very tightly on the soap for a good while. The entire facility went firmly in the reds for that year due to nearly all contracted reworks missing deadlines, which means a daily fee of tens of thousands per contract. My ears in the company soon sought themselves new jobs, despite in one case being there for 20 years. Last I heard is that the company had to contract the producer of the measurement machine to train new employees how to operate it properly. I had asked for triple my pay, and well, those guys were more like triple the zeros at the end. Oh, and I did find a new job within one day. I was fired on Monday, had the interview on Tuesday, a test work day at Thursday. I was asked at the end of the day when I could start, which was the next Monday. I do manual measurements now in an incoming quality control department. The boss is a blast, the team is all friendly, and my commute is 18 minutes with an electric scooter. I worked there for 9 months now, and I already am the de facto team leader for first sample stuff, and best of all, I'm appreciated for the work I do too. And the next one is also a malicious compliance story, which is titled, "You Can Cancel at No Cost." So last year my wife and I got married. My parents and sister live halfway across the world, but that did not stop them from coming over to celebrate. Since neither my wife and I get to spend much time with them, we decided to rent a house for a couple days in a nearby wine region. You know the deal, hang out, drink some wine, eat some cheese and have some quality family time. It had been 3 years since we last saw them. A month or so before my parents and sister came over, I got an email from the owners of the vacation house saying they had sold the property, but the new owners were gonna continue to rent out the house and they were gonna honor the booking, so not to worry. All good. 2 weeks later I got an email from the new owners saying the booking was still okay, but they were gonna over their records and said I still owed them $100 for the booking. I replied back with the receipt and booking confirmation that I was all paid up. Turns out the new owners unilaterally decided to increase the price of the accommodation and I had to pay up. But they were gracious enough to say I could cancel at no cost, but they would rather we keep the booking and pay that little extra. No cost for cancelling the booking, you say? Within 5 minutes I had found another vacation house in the same region, there's literally dozens of them, and I sent a quick email back to please cancel my booking and process the refund. They asked, "We would like you to keep the booking, can we split the difference?" "No thanks, please cancel the booking." "If you keep the booking, we will throw in a bottle of wine." "No thanks, please cancel the booking." Good thing the refund came back with days. Their reviews have been less than stellar on TripAdvisor. I wonder why. And yeah guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I will see you again tomorrow.